What's up, guys? My name is Gabriel Rocha, and today I'm here with episode 3 of the newly named show, Winning the Margins. Now, the first 2 episodes I released, I hadn't named the show yet because there wasn't really anything that kind of stuck out to me, but I spent some time yesterday kind of thinking through it, and my thought process was, well, if I'm going to name the show, I need to make sure that the name aligns with what I'm really trying to do here. And so after mulling it over, I kind of recognized that what I'm trying to do is help people just take that small step forward every single day or every single opportunity that they can. And with that, one of the topics that I've talked about with a lot of my clients is winning the margins. And one thing that you hear so much of in mainstream media today, especially within the sports world, is, well, can I show up and be 1% better today? And a lot of times, like, getting 1% better, especially if you're already operating at a high level, that's a big jump. And so I'm more focused on, can I win the 0.01% within that same framework, especially for someone who's operating at a high level already. So that's where the name Winning the Margins comes from. It's not just about doing the thing that's going to make that margin for improvement, but it's about doing it well, performing at a high level while you're doing it. So I've gotten some pretty incredible feedback on the first 2 episodes so far. I've got them up on YouTube. Now they're up on Spotify. Hoping to get them up on Apple Music as well one of these days here pretty soon. But for today's topic, we're going to be talking about keeping your promises. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially with the clients that I'm working with and how they're able to operate at a very high level. And so when I think about keeping your promises to yourself, the most prominent example that I can think of is Kobe Bryant. And I feel like I can use him for so many different examples. You know, I grew up in Los Angeles. I watched Kobe Bryant play at Staples Center, which it will never be Crypto.com Arena to me. It'll always be Staples Center. That's a whole different conversation. But with Kobe, I always distinctly remember him talking about the commitment that he would make before the start of a season. So obviously, the season, 82 games long for regular season, and then however long the playoffs are. And one thing that he always talked about was at the start of summer, when he was getting himself in shape, his body conditioned, his mind conditioned for the rigors of the regular season and the playoffs, he always said that before I actually walked into summer training that first day, is I would sign that contract with myself. And essentially what that contract was, it really just talked about all of the work that he had to do over the course of that summer to prime himself for the whole season ahead. And so it was about signing the contract, meaning that I'm not going to make any excuses for the work. I'm not going to compromise on my standards for the work ethic that I have. I signed this contract and I'm bound to this contract. Now, it was never a physical contract or a legally binding contract, but it was one of those things where he said, I'm going to hold myself to this standard and I'm going to keep that promise to myself that I'm going to uphold that standard for the duration of this entire season. And what I find really interesting about that is that Kobe was able to keep those promises to himself for a long period of time. Part of that was also the way that he structured his life around basketball. So if you guys know anything about Kobe, he used to actually get a ride in a helicopter from his house to the arena and to practice. And the reason why he would do that is because for him, his promise that he made to his family is, I'm going to take my kids to school, right? And so that's a promise that he kept to himself. And so he said, so if I have this goal that I'm trying to meet, well, then I need to structure my life around doing the things I say I'm going to do so I can keep that promise. So he hired a pilot and he would take a helicopter. That way he could go work out in the morning, he could come back, and then he could go take his daughter to school, or his daughters to school, and then he could then take a nap, go work out again, right? And that's how he would save time. Now, for a lot of other athletes, they might not want to pay the associated costs of, hiring a pilot, renting out a helicopter just to go to practice. But then that also means that a lot of times they'd be losing valuable time with their families, and so their home life might suffer. But for Kobe, it was, no, I made this promise to my family that I'm going to take the girls to school every day. And he kept that promise by the way that he structured his life. Now, this is kind of ironic timing because I was actually on a call with a client last night, and we were talking about his work capacity. And now for this specific client, he's at a point where he's very successful, right? He's worked his butt off. He's already got a full-time job. Plus, he's also an online coach with close to 60 clients. And one thing that ended up happening is that his quality of life started to suffer. And he's no longer prioritizing his own sleep. He's no longer prioritizing getting into the Bible, staying in the scripture, which is important to him. Might not be important to all of you guys, but for him, it's very important. He stopped doing his meditation, his breath work, and those were promises that he made to himself at the beginning of the year. But he was no longer keeping those promises to himself. And so because he wasn't keeping those promises, his quality of life started to suffer, because originally he identified, these are good things that I need to be doing in order to uphold the quality of the work that I'm doing. But as business started rolling in, he started becoming more successful. His time started getting pulled away from him, and he started getting pulled in other directions, which meant that he started to sacrifice on those promises that he had made for himself. And so when we're on the call last night, I was talking to him, and one of the ways that we kind of worked through this, because he is someone who's very productive, works his tail off, and so I don't want him to sacrifice his productivity, and I don't want him to stop working really hard. So one of the things that we had to do was, okay, well, we need to identify what your specific mission is. And so being an online coach, his mission is the quality of the service that I give to my clients, which also means that we had to identify, okay, well, what is the upper limit of clients that I can take on right now? And am I already close to that upper limit, which it sounded like he was. And so as we're thinking about it, we're brainstorming, I said, could you handle 80 clients right now? He said, that sounds like a little bit too much. I said, okay, what about 75? And he's like, 75 still seems like a little too much. 70? He said, I think 70 is right around where I'd cap out. And so I said, all right, cool. So then let's make that a condition that I'm going to cap myself at 70 clients. Like I said, he's close to 60. He could probably get to 70 within the next month or two. And the reason why that was important is because we need to protect his time so that way he can still protect the quality of the service that he's giving to the clients that he currently has. So with that being said, once we identified like, hey, what's the upper limit here? Then we had to put in some hard boundaries, which is once I get to 70, no more people are getting signed on. I'm not doing any new client programming. If anyone tries to inquire, I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to put you on a wait list, right? And I will notify you if someone ends up leaving the team. Now, in addition to that, what I didn't want was for him to necessarily completely overhaul his life, because my main goal here with him is let's just start making some incremental changes that are going to get you right back on that right path. Because what he was saying to me was that his stress management capabilities were starting to suffer. His sleep was starting to suffer. His ability to stay present and focus started to suffer. And he was almost kind of at his wit's end with things. Now, with all of that being said, and the high level of stress kind of taking over his life, we also recognize that there are things that you can do to help you manage that stress. And you've actually already been engaging with them already, which is the breath work, the meditation, breaking your phone at night, right? Waking up and getting into the Bible. All of those things are for him good to protect his ability to provide quality service and also keep him at a good baseline. Because what actually ended up started happening is that he was having a high sympathetic physiological response just on a daily basis. His resting heart rate was going up, the perceived level of stress he was experiencing was going up, and that's just not good for business, right? As a coach, you have a lot of responsibilities, and so you want to be very clear when you're making these decisions that are impacting your clients' lives on a daily basis. And what ended up happening is that I had this moment, almost like an epiphany, where I recognized that, and I said this to him directly. I said, you're keeping promises to other people, your clients, at the cost of keeping promises to yourself, which is the sleep, the meditation, breaking your phone, etc. And when I said that to him, that moment hit him, and he kind of had one of those like, damn, you're right. I'm compromising on my ability to keep my promises to myself. And I think that was a really powerful moment. And so with that, we started to audit what his life looks like currently. And then we started to reverse engineer what do we need to do in order to build a structure so that way you can start keeping your promises to yourself again. And the reason why keeping your promises to yourself is so important is because when you don't keep your promises to yourself, it rewires your brain, and that becomes your new identity. If you consistently break those promises, then you become someone who breaks promises. And that has a very powerful downstream effect into all types of domains. I'm sure for those of you guys in here who have been high-level athletes before, either in a competition season or in a bodybuilding prep, etc., and you're able to prioritize all of those little promises to yourself because that is your main priority, you recognize how much everything else starts to suffer in your life because you've identified, I need to do all of these things. Now, the reverse of that is also when you're not in a competition prep or you're not in the middle of a hectic season, it's how do I structure my life in a way such that I can still continue to keep the promises within the structure of my days that I've identified for myself that are going to pour back into me so that way I can perform at a high level in whatever domain I'm showing up in, whether it's your career, whether it's school, your relationships, whatever athletic endeavors that you're doing. Because what I've also come to realize is that every single day when we wake up, we are met with a series of choices on whether we're going to choose to engage in the things that we say we want to do. And so if you're watching this video, you probably have some form of goal or something you're trying to achieve. When you can identify, hey, this is what the goal is, you also have to identify, well, what's the path to getting to that goal? What are the series of actions, behaviors, thought patterns that are going to get me closer to that goal? And when you compromise on doing those things, breaking your promises that you've made to yourself, then it moves you further away from your goal. And at the end of the day, let's say you've identified these are the 50 things I need to do in a day to make sure that I'm keeping every single one of my promises in my relationships, in work, in school, in athletics, etc. That still does not guarantee that you're going to be successful. But what it does is it puts you in the best possible position to be successful. And I heard this really profound quote from Drake Davis, who's also in the mental performance space. And he said, you're entitled to the work, but you're not entitled to the outcomes from the work. It was something along those lines. But the premise of it was that you can do all of the work, and you should be doing all of the work if it's something that is very important to you, knowing that you don't have full control of the outcome. But controlling the outcome isn't the actual goal. It's just, I'm doing the work for the sake of doing the work because I love this thing so much. And that's where keeping promises is such a big deal, because if you're someone who consistently breaks your promises to yourself, like I said earlier, there's an identity shift that happens. You become someone who's willing to compromise on the things that you say are important. So, for instance, in your relationship, if you tell your partner, hey, every Friday night, we're gonna have a date night. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks go by, no Friday night date night. Well, now that becomes the new standard. And in your life, you don't operate to the highest level standards. Your life falls to what you're willing to accept or tolerate, because that is what the norm is. And that's why it's so important to develop structures and frameworks within your life that you can protect, such that it will pour into other areas of your life and you will be able to operate at a higher level. So being able to have a fruitful, loving, productive relationship with your partner might mean, hey, we need to protect Friday nights for our date night. So that way, one, we're not having any stress in this relationship or, outside of the norm. But that way I can show up to work on Monday and be the best version of myself. So that way when I'm training, I don't need to be thinking about the argument that we just had because one of us is feeling unloved or we feel disconnected. And so by breaking those promises, you give yourself a higher probability that you're going to endure the stressors, but more importantly, you're going to become the person who's willing to break promises in other domains of your life. And that is not something that I want for any of you guys. So what I would encourage you all to do is identify what are the things that are most important to you in your life. Identify how you can get yourself closer to acquiring or attaining those things that you've identified are the most important to you. Also identify what are some of the biggest roadblocks that I might face in trying to acquire these things. And then you start to reverse engineer what your day needs to look like or what your week needs to look like, such that you can keep all of those small promises to yourself on a daily basis, that you're still engaging with the daily actions that are necessary in order to reach that goal. So I'll leave you guys with this, which is some of the promises that I keep to myself, which is, waking up at a certain time every day. Obviously, brushing your teeth, that should go without saying. But eating my 5 meals every day, that's a promise that I keep to myself. Doing my cardio, that's a promise that I keep to myself. Having one date night a week with my girlfriend, that is part of the promises that I keep to myself. And when I'm engaging in all of those things, my entire life is fully in alignment. And when your life is fully in alignment and everything is moving in the same direction towards winning those small margins, you reduce the amount of friction that you have within your life. And that's why keeping those small promises to yourself is so important, because the more promises that you keep consistently over a long period of time, the more you're going to influence the chances that you're going to be successful. You won't be able to guarantee it because nothing is guaranteed. But at the very least, you're going to give yourself that best shot. And also your identity is going to shift towards one where you are going to identify yourself as someone who keeps your promises. And if you can keep your promises to yourself, it's much more likely that you're able to keep your promises to others. And that's how you become a more dependable person. People trust you, and you're able to operate at a much higher level across domains. I hope that was helpful. Like I said, I really enjoy these because as I'm talking through this, I'm exploring these ideas myself. I had some notes written down. I didn't even look in this book pretty much one time the entire time I was talking. Because like I said in the first episode, I really just want to treat these as, I have an idea and then I just want to explore that idea as I'm working through it. Now, there are going to be times where I'm going to have notes and a framework that I'm working through, but all in all, I think it's just a really fun exercise in just trying to develop a better understanding of how these different things can influence our ability to try to take a small step forward in these domains and really just trying to win the margins. Can you win that 0.1% of whatever thing that you're trying to do? But thank you guys for watching. Stay tuned for another episode. Should have one up hopefully next week. And yeah, I appreciate y'all.